Hi everyone, I hope your day is going well. I have a challenge for you before we start this video. Like and subscribe before this cat disappears. Okay, I hope you were fast enough. Today's puzzle is a really long one and is making me dizzy as I type out the explanation, but I guess it's worth it, right? Oh, and before I forget, shout out to Smitharani Krishnan for guessing Sicilian Defense as my favorite opening as a beginner. It is one of my favorites now, but I used to like playing the Rai Lopez, as white. Good try anyway, so I'll give them a shout out. Subscribe to their channel in the description. Moving on, here's today's puzzle. We are in check from Black's rook, so how do we escape the checks? Note that we cannot capture the rook, as Black has no squares. Black's last pawn is blocked and his king's only two squares are controlled by White's pawns. This is a hard puzzle, so I'll wait 20 seconds. Do pause the video if you need more time to think. Remember, the goal is to move our king into a position where Black has no checks, without capturing the rook, and not getting a drawn position due to the 50-move rule. Unfortunately, this puzzle was from a random post and I do not know who composed this technical and ingenious puzzle. If any of you know, do let me know in the comments section. Your 20 seconds begins now. Okay, so I hope you are done thinking. Immediately running with the king to a2 draws the game, as rook a3 check forces king b1, and after rook a1 check, we have no choice but to capture the rook, resulting in a stalemate. Then, what about running away from the pawns? King a4 basically leaves our king with no shielding from our pawns, so there is practically no way to escape from the checks. Eventually, the game still ends in a draw, either by the 50-move rule or stalemate. Then, what about pawn to d3 blocking the check? This move is the best move, according to the engine at depth 22. Now, it says pawn to c3 is better, but at deeper analysis the engine changes its mind. While this move seems to have the same intention the other pawn moves, the e2 pawn is still there, which does not allow our king to swing around on the light squares. Now, running down to g2 also does not work, as Black's rook can simply capture g3 and keep on checking. Running up also does not make any progress, and similarly, this variation ends up in a draw, also either by the 50-move rule or stalemate. Hence, the only winning move is pawn to e3. This move looks similar to pawn to d3 or c3, but is actually very different. After Black captures the pawn with rook takes e3 check, pawn to c3 is played, getting rid of all of White's light squared pawns. After rook takes c3 check, king to a2 prepares to hide behind the pawns. Now, rook a3 check is followed by king b1, then rook a1 check, king c2, rook c1 check, king to d3, again using the d-pawn to block checks from the first rank. Rook to c3 check, our king runs to e2, rook to e3 checking on the third rank, our king goes to f1, now using the f-pawn to block checks from the third rank. Rook to e8 maintains pressure on the e-file while preventing promotion of the c8 pawn, or rook to h8, both which would lead to checkmate. Now, we must foresee this crucial move when analyzing this variation. Pawn to g4. This move seems redundant and just a waiting move, but as we will see later, this move has a lot of significance. Rook to e1 check, and the cycle of running from the first rank to the second, and to the third rank, maneuvering around the pawns, begins again. Our king runs to g2, then to f3, then to e2. Remember not to be worried about Black's rook capturing our rook, as we have pawn to c8, promotion to a queen or rook, and a checkmate. Rook to e3 check is now met by king to d1, seemingly returning back to the original pattern. Rook to e1 check, king to c2, rook to c1 check, king to b3, and checkmate is near. Black's only check is along the third rank. And after our king retreats to a2 once again. Like on move 3, notice that black cannot play rook a3 as before, because our rook on h3 is eyeing the a3 square, and capturing the rook would be checkmate. Black has no choice, and simply plays rook takes c7, delaying the game one more move, and now rook to h8 check forces rook to c8, and rook takes c8 checkmate ends our king's long journey of checks. Starting off at b3, then to a2, b1, c2, d3, e2, f1, g2, f3, e2, d1, c2, back to b3, then to a2 again. This shows how computers may not be able to see the best move, as the engine suggested pawn to d3 instead of e3, but this variation leads to a win while that one leads to a draw. Now, wasn't that a long puzzle? I spent over 2 hours analyzing and typing this whole thing out, so do leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye. Also, why does it say draw lol? The evaluation bar clearly says it's a win for white. The engine is just being salty that pawn to d3 didn't work lol.